3. Backworldsmen. Once on a time, Zarathustra also cast his fancy beyond man, like all backworldsmen. The work of a suffering and tortured god did the world then seem to me.
Zarathustra tells us that when he was younger, he too believed that there is a world of truth beyond our world. This view is prevalent in Western philosophy, ever since Plato described everything in our world as merely a pale and imperfect reflection of the ideas found in heaven. It is also prevalent in the monotheistic religions that see this world as an imperfect world man was banished to from the perfect and joyful Garden of Eden. Altogether, they lead to the belief that we are trapped in a false and unhappy world, and must aspire to return to the world of truth and happiness. Zarathustra refers to people who hold this view as backworldsmen. He admits that he was once one of them, and yet he was also different. Most backworldsmen believe that our world was created by God, and since God is good, the fact that he put us in such a bad world must be because we deserve it, or as a test for us to pass. But Zarathustra says that when he believed in creation, he had a different interpretation. The world is as it is, he believed, because it was created by a suffering and tortured God. This actually has an autobiographical dimension. Later, in his book The Genealogy of Morals, Nietzsche tells us that at age 13 he wrote his first literary work, a short essay that portrayed God as the father of all evil. It was the beginning of his rebellion against Christianity and its morality.
The dream and diction of a god did the world then seem to me coloured vapours before the eyes of a divinely dissatisfied one. Good and evil, and joy and woe, and I and thou, coloured vapours did they seem to me before creative eyes. The Creator wished to look away from himself. Thereupon he created the world. Intoxicating joy is it for the sufferer to look away from his suffering and forget himself. Intoxicating joy and self-forgetting did the world once seem to me. This world, the eternally imperfect, an eternal contradiction's image and imperfect image, an intoxicating joy to its imperfect creator, thus did the world once seem to me.
This is better understood when you are familiar with Nietzsche's philosophy. Nietzsche claimed that everyone is seeking ecstasy. However, there are several types of ecstasy, and happy people seek a different kind of ecstasy from what suffering people seek. We shall later become acquainted with the kind of ecstasy experienced by the happy. What the suffering seek is intoxication, the kind of ecstasy that allows them to temporarily escape their lives and forget themselves for a while. And the God who created this world seemed to him like one who is suffering, and created it to escape himself. The world's imperfections and contradictions are thus understood as meant to create conflicts, for the entertainment of that creator.
Thus, once on a time, did I also cast my fancy beyond man, like all backworldsmen. Beyond man, forsooth? Ah, ye brethren, that God whom I created was human work and human madness, like all the gods. A man was he, and only a poor fragment of a man, and ego. Out of mine own ashes and glow it came unto me, that phantom, and verily it came not unto me from the beyond.
Zarathustra holds that all gods are men's creation, and that they created them in their own image. This is not an original claim, of course. It was quite a common argument in the 19th century. But for him, it is mainly a way to admit that he once was suffering, and searching for intoxication to forget himself in. The suffering God that he created in his imagination was a reflection of his own condition. By creating that God, he already detached himself from the religions around him, those that believe in a benevolent God. But this was only the first step.
What happened, my brethren? I surpassed myself, the suffering one. I carried mine own ashes to the mountain. A brighter flame I contrived for myself, and lo, thereupon the phantom withdrew from me. To me, the convalescent, would it now be suffering and torment to believe in such phantoms? Suffering would it now be to me, and humiliation. Thus speak I to backworldsmen.
Earlier, we saw him define current human condition as a hybrid between plant and phantom. Now we see what he meant by phantom. Since he believed that this world is merely a reflection of the real world, and that he is merely a reflection of what he can truly be, it turned him into a phantom. It is not that we are a phantom of our true selves, as the Backworldsmen would have us believe. Our existence in this world is actually the true existence. But our belief in that other world is draining us of our substance, and turns us into phantoms. Which means that this phantom state isn't our fate, but something that is self-inflicted, a state that we can overcome. Zarathustra went up the mountain, and there, he tells us, he surpassed himself. This is the first time we meet the idea of self-surpassing, and already we get a good idea what it means. It means that you overcame your previous condition that brought you suffering, and became happier. In the previous discourse, The Academic Chairs of Virtue, we met a wise man who talked about self-overcoming. But what he was talking about was overcoming our nature, repressing it, in order to achieve peace of mind. Self-surpassing is something entirely different. It is not overcoming of our nature, but overcoming of bad ideas that we hold, ideas that detach us from our nature and turn us into phantoms. Since Zarathustra believes that this world is the true world, we should aspire to live according to our nature, as this would be the happiest existence. However, don't make the mistake of thinking that this means that we go back to being apes. As we recall, the idea is not to return to the lower state of the ape, but to achieve a higher state, that of the Superman. So the self-surpassing isn't achieved by merely discarding the ideas of the Backworldsmen, but by creating better ideas, ideas that draw from our nature, but shape and mold it in a supreme form. Once he understood that, Zarathustra felt that he was healed from his phantom state. He became a convalescent, and now he looks with pity on the Backworldsmen, who don't realize that their suffering is self-inflicted.
Suffering was it, and impotence, that created all backworlds, and the short madness of happiness, which only the greatest sufferer experienceth. Weariness, which seeketh to get to the ultimate with one leap, with a death leap, a poor ignorant weariness, unwilling even to will any longer, that created all gods and backworlds.
Zarathustra attributes the creation of the idea of the world of truth that is beyond our world, and the idea of God, to suffering. Suffering, of course, did not begin with the Backworldsmen. It was always part of human life, and people who were weary of the suffering chose to create the idea of the perfect afterlife, an idea that only turned them into phantoms and increased their suffering. For these people, the highest form of joy is those moments of intoxication when they forget themselves, and they attribute these moments to getting in touch with that other world. This only makes them hate their earthly existence more, and wallow more deeply in their phantom state.
Believe me, my brethren, it was the body which despaired of the body. It groped with the fingers of the infatuated spirit at the ultimate walls. Believe me, my brethren, it was the body which despaired of the earth. It heard the bowels of existence speaking unto it. And then it sought to get through the ultimate walls with its head, and not with its head only, into the other world.
The monotheistic religions, and the Platonic tradition, tell us that our true self is a spirit, that is trapped in a body and should escape it. However, according to Zarathustra, this is the very belief that turns us into phantoms. He believes that our true self is the body, a body that has a head which contains intelligence. This idea will be developed in the next discourse, so we shall leave it at that, for now. The main point here is that some human bodies have despaired of the earth, the very earth from which they draw their life and power, so their intelligence created the idea of another world, a backworld.
But that other world is well concealed from man, that dehumanized, inhuman world, which is a celestial naught, and the bowels of existence do not speak unto man except as man. Verily, it is difficult to prove all being, and hard to make it speak. Tell me, ye brethren, is not the strangest of all things best proved? Yea, this ego, with its contradiction and perplexity, speaketh most uprightly of its being, this creating, willing, evaluing ego, which is the measure and value of things. And this most upright existence, the ego, it speaketh of the body, and still implieth the body, even when it museth and raveth and fluttereth with broken wings. Always more uprightly learneth it to speak, the ego, and the more it learneth, the more doth it find titles and honours for the body and the earth.
Once the idea of another world was created, and the idea that our body is a prison that our spirit is trapped in, humans try to escape the body. However, since this will actually comes from the body, it cannot help but affirm the reality of the body again and again. We meet the concept of ego here. The ego is the will of the individual, and Zarathustra tells us that it creates all values. Nietzsche, remember, does not believe that there is any truth about the world that we can discover. All our values and truths are our own creation, our ego speaking and trying to impose itself on the world. This ego, in its pride and will to transcend, tried for ages to transcend the body, but in vain. The body is our true self, the very thing that this ego comes from, and cannot be transcended.
A new pride taught me mine ego, and that teach I unto men, no longer to thrust one's head into the sand of celestial things, but to carry it freely, a terrestrial head, which giveth meaning to the earth. A new will teach I unto men, to choose that path which man hath followed blindly, and to approve of it, and no longer to slink aside from it, like the sick and perishing. The sick and perishing, it was they who despised the body and the earth, and invented the heavenly world, and the redeeming blood drops, but even those sweet and sad poisons they borrowed from the body and the earth. From their misery they sought escape, and the stars were too remote for them. Then they sighed, "Oh, that there were heavenly paths by which to steal into another existence and into happiness." Then they contrived for themselves their bypaths and bloody draughts. Beyond the sphere of their body and this earth, they now fancied themselves transported, these ungrateful ones. But to what did they owe the convulsion and rapture of their transport? To their body and this earth.
He talks some more about the Backworldsmen and the imaginary world of truth that they created. They were trying to escape their true nature, which is earthly and physical, but, since you can never really escape your nature, they were actually expressing it. This is what he means when he talks about the path which man hath followed blindly. They didn't realize that they were actually speaking for their body, for their true nature. If we listen carefully to what they're saying, their true nature will be revealed to us, even behind their words that try to conceal it. Zarathustra demands that we embrace the path that we have always walked blindly, and start walking it with pride.
Gentle is Zarathustra to the sickly. Verily, he is not indignant at their modes of consolation and ingratitude. May they become convalescents and overcomers, and create higher bodies for themselves. Neither is Zarathustra indignant at a convalescent who looketh tenderly on his delusions, and at midnight stealeth round the grave of his God, but sickness and a sick frame remain even in his tears. Many sickly ones have there always been among those who muse and languish for God. Violently they hate the discerning ones, and the latest of virtues, which is uprightness. Backward they always gaze toward dark ages. Then, indeed, were delusion and faith something different. Raving of the reason was likeness to God, and doubt was sin.
Zarathustra shows compassion for the Backworldsmen. Since he was once like them, he understands their suffering. They, on the other hand, are afraid of him. Their worldview is based on blind faith and obedience, and they cannot abide those who are upright and honest, and break away from their teachings to seek something more truthful. They used to be more powerful, and were able to stifle the upright, but not anymore. Zarathustra is free to speak, and now he is going to tell us more about the sickness that ails those Backworldsmen.
Too well do I know those godlike ones, they insist on being believed in, and that doubt is sin. Too well also do I know what they themselves most believe in. Verily, not in backworlds and the redeeming blood drops, but in the body do they also believe most, and their own body is for them the thing in itself. But it is a sickly thing to them, and gladly would they get out of their skin. Therefore hearken they to the preachers of death, and themselves preach backworlds.
The Backworldsmen may think that they escape this world, and this body that they are trapped in, by contemplating the world of truth. But actually, they are more obsessed with the body than anyone else. Because they hated and starved their body, it is now sickly and aching, and thus constantly reminding them of its existence. The true thing that drives them is not the wish to reach the world of truth, but the wish to escape the body that brings them so much misery.
Hearken rather, my brethren, to the voice of the healthy body. It is a more upright and pure voice. More uprightly and purely speaketh the healthy body, perfect and square-built, and it speaketh of the meaning of the earth. Thus spake Zarathustra.
The alternative, says Zarathustra, is to live in a healthy body. Then your earthly life will no longer bring you constant misery, and you will not have to look for ways to escape it. To achieve a healthy body, we need to go through a process of self-surpassing, until we overcome all those harmful ideas created by the Backworldsmen. Much of the book is already preempted in this chapter.